The world is merciless toward the frail. It thrives on weakness, sharpening its fangs on the remains of those who stand unguarded. In the frigid outskirts of Saint-Isidore, Quebec, a boy wandered alone, his frame burdened by invisible shackles. He was not yet a warrior, not yet a name etched into eternity, just a frightened child, eyes lowered, hoping that today wouldn't be the day they cornered him again. The schoolyard was a battlefield without honor. Blows came from nowhere, voices dripped with venom, and hands reached not just to rob him of money, but to strip away his dignity, his solace, his identity. He learned to maneuver through the chaos like prey in a realm of hunters, knowing that the scent of fear was his greatest liability. Each day the same unforgiving lesson was seared into his soul. Survival belongs to the strong. He saw no escape, no hero, only the endless cycle of degradation and torment. But deep within, something ancient stirred. It was not fury, nor was it vengeance, it was determination. The embers of defiance smoldered in his chest, whispering that he was destined for more than suffering. He did not realize it yet, but adversity was shaping him, tempering his spirit into iron. Every strike that landed, every jeer that cut into him, was forging a fighter. He would not flee forever. One day, the hunted would become the hunter. The boy they shattered would rise from the dust they buried him in. He would wear his scars as armor, move like a phantom, strike like a tempest. They didn't know it yet, but the boy they tormented would one day stand before millions, unshaken, indomitable. His name was Georges St-Pierre, and this was where his legend took root. The air inside the dojo carried the scent of sweat and discipline. Wooden floors worn from years of relentless footsteps bore silent witness to countless battles fought in silence. Georges stood at the edge of the mat, his small hands clenched into fists, his heartbeat echoing like war drums in his chest. This was not the schoolyard, no longer a victim. This was a different battleground, one governed by honor, precision, and mastery. His father had brought him here not to brawl, but to evolve. The first time he bowed before his instructor, he felt the weight of something far greater than himself. Kyokushin karate was not just movement. It was a philosophy, a way of existence. Every strike had intention. Every block was a shield against the world that had tried to crush him. Georges trained with an obsession, as if each perfected kick, each refined stance, was a matter of survival. He learned not to rely solely on sight, but on instinct, to predict, to react, to command his body as a weapon of will. The bullies who once loomed over him, who laughed as he recoiled beneath their fists, were no longer phantoms haunting his mind. They were fuel. Every moment of disgrace, every tear swallowed in silence, only fed the fire within. But strength alone was never enough. His master taught him that true power did not stem from wrath, but from control. The greatest warriors did not fight out of anger. They fought to refine themselves, to master the war within before conquering the war outside. Georges absorbed every lesson like scripture. He was still just a child, but the prey was vanishing. In its place, something new was emerging, something fearless, something destined for greatness. The world outside the dojo had not changed, but Georges had. The hallways that once belonged to his tormentors no longer echoed with his silence. He walked differently now, his spine straight, his steps deliberate. There was something in his eyes, something unreadable. Not defiance, not arrogance, just a storm, waiting to be unleashed. Predators always sensed when prey had grown claws. They watched him, unsure. The same bullies who had once toyed with him now hesitated. One of them tested him, cornering him near the lockers, expecting the same trembling fear, the same surrender. But fear no longer ruled Georges. He didn't flinch, he didn't hesitate. His fists moved faster than thought, striking like lightning. A single precise blow, sharp, deliberate, final. The bully staggered, gasping, not just from the pain, but from the realization that Georges St-Pierre was no longer his victim. He never would be again. Word spread like wildfire. The weak kid was gone. In his place stood something else, something they couldn't define. But Georges did not celebrate. He did not revel in victory, because this was not victory. This was only the beginning. Strength was nothing without discipline. Power without purpose was just violence. He returned to the dojo with an even greater hunger, an obsession that burned hotter than before. Every strike became sharper. Every movement was a whisper of future dominance. But it was not enough. Karate had given him a foundation, but the world was bigger than martial artist. The journey had only just begun, but Georges knew the path ahead would be carved from sweat and sacrifice. There were no shortcuts, no easy roads. If he wanted to stand among the greats, he had to tear himself apart and rebuild. Stronger, sharper, unstoppable. But there was a problem. The world of elite martial arts didn't exist in Quebec. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling, Muay Thai. These disciplines were ghosts in his homeland. If he wanted to evolve, he had to leave behind comfort, familiarity, everything he knew. He had to chase the fire. With nothing but raw ambition and empty pockets, he packed his bag and set out for New York City. The first time he stepped into Renzo Gracie's gym, he was just another hopeful fighter. He spoke barely a word of English. He had no money, no guarantees, only hunger. The moment he rolled with a real Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, the truth hit him like a freight train. He was crushed again and again and again. Every move he made was countered. Every attack was neutralized. He wasn't just beaten, he was dismantled. The man who had stood undefeated in his small world was drowning in an ocean of skill. But he did not break. He endured. Every submission, every painful tap, every moment of suffocating failure, it was fuel. He learned. He adapted. He stayed longer, trained harder, returned every single day with vengeance in his veins. Pain became his teacher. Defeat became his blueprint for dominance. The predators of his childhood had turned him into a fighter. The masters of combat would turn him into something even more deadly. Georges St-Pierre was no longer fighting to survive. He was fighting to conquer. The transformation had begun. Georges St-Pierre was no longer just a student of martial arts. He was becoming a machine, engineered for battle. He lived on the edge of exhaustion, pushing his body beyond reason. His muscles screamed. His lungs burned. His skin turned to leather, bruises marking every lesson learned in blood and struggle. He trained like a man possessed, forging himself into something inhumanly relentless. But survival was not enough. He wanted more. He wanted domination. The world of professional fighting loomed before him, a battleground where only the strongest survived. His first professional fight came in 2002. The cage was smaller than he had imagined, the crowd louder, the moment heavier. His opponent was a savage, an experienced fighter who had already tasted blood under the bright lights. But Georges felt no fear. The years of torment, the pain, the sacrifice, it had all led here. The bell rang. His body moved like it was wired for destruction, precision, control. A head kick found its mark. The fight was over before it had even begun. Victory. His hand was raised, but the moment barely registered. There was no celebration, no relief, because this was just the first step. The climb had begun, and at the top of the mountain stood the legends. If he wanted to reach them, he would have to keep moving, keep evolving, keep hunting. The world would soon know the name Georges St-Pierre. The road to greatness was paved with sacrifice. Georges knew this better than anyone. There were no easy fights, no mercy in the cage. Every opponent was a test, every battle a war. He tore through Canada's fight scene like a storm, leaving wreckage in his wake. The victories piled up, but his hunger only grew. He wanted the biggest stage, the fiercest competition, the ultimate proving ground. There was only one place for that, the UFC. The call came in 2004, the moment he had been waiting for. His UFC debut was against a veteran, a fighter with power, experience, and confidence. But Georges had something greater, obsession, shed every challenger before. Him. Georges had earned his shot, but standing across from Hughes was unlike anything he had ever faced. The pressure was suffocating. The lights burned hotter than ever before, and as the fight began, Georges realized something chilling. He was not ready. The cage door locked. The weight of reality slammed down like a sledgehammer. This was not just another fight. This was a war against a legend. Matt Hughes was not like the others. He was a juggernaut, a relentless force who had ruled the division with an iron grip. Georges had trained for this. He had visualized it 1,000 times. But the moment swallowed him whole. His nerves betrayed him. His confidence wavered. Across from him stood a man who had already won this fight in his mind before it even began. The champion was a wall of muscle and experience. Then came the mistake, a brief hesitation, a flicker of doubt. Hughes seamless. Before Georges could even react, his arm was trapped. The pressure was immediate, the pain unbearable. He had seconds before his arm snapped. The choice promise was made. He would never feel this helpless again. He would rebuild. He would evolve. He would become something different. Next time, he would not be denied. Defeat was a scar, but scars were lessons carved in pain. George refused to let his loss to Hughes define him. It would forge him. He dissected every mistake, every hesitation, every weakness that had betrayed him inside that cage. The problem wasn't just physical, it was mental. He had fought like a challenger. His training intensified, reaching an obsession that bordered on madness. He hunted down the best minds in combat sports, absorbing techniques like a machine processing data, striking, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. He would master them all. He traveled, sought out the strongest training partners, and transformed himself into something new. The fear that had gripped him before Hughes? Gone. Now there was only hunger. He tore through the division like a man possessed. 1 victory, 2, 3. He did not just win, he dominated. Each opponent fell before him, unable to withstand the storm he had become. The UFC could no longer deny it. He had earned another shot at Hughes. But this time, it would not be the same. This was not the Georges St-Pierre. He was faster, stronger, sharper, unrelenting. The rematch was set. The world held its breath. The reigning champion, the most dominant welterweight in UFC history, would face a challenger reborn in fire. Hughes as the immovable king, the welterweight titan who had ruled for years. But Georges knew the truth. The man who had crumbled beneath Hughes' dominance was gone. That Georges had died the night he tapped out. What stood in his place was something faster, stronger, mercilessly precise. The arena. He did not scream. He did not celebrate wildly. He simply stood, victorious, unshaken, undeniable. Georges St-Pierre was the new welterweight champion of the world. The belt was his. But Georges knew the truth. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. Champions win titles. They wanted his title. They wanted his legacy. They wanted his crown. The weight of greatness was heavier than he had imagined. But he did not flinch. Instead, he trained harder. The UFC threw its best warriors at him, believing one of them would dethrone the new king. They all failed. Thiago Alves, a wrecking machine with... The storm had passed, but something inside him had changed. And then, in front of the cameras, he spoke the words no one expected. I need to step away. The empire had not fallen, but its king had walked away from the throne. The Leviathan era. Some men fight for victory, others fight for survival. Georges St-Pierre fought for mastery, and in the end, mastery was his.